Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Tuesday, the 20th of March, comes to you from London. And quite a big sell-off in the US markets last night, which we'll take a look at in a minute. But first of all, the dollar just holding some strength. It did fall away quite sharply yesterday, finding support on the cloud on the short-term chart, but we are below resistance here on the point and figure chart still. So it is bearish. Price is turning bearish. Looks like we're going to see a bout of bearishness again with the dollar. Looking at the euro, that's now coming through the cloud, just starting to show some euro strength there. So that's going to be quite key as well. And taking a look at the Japanese yen, we see the dollar has actually strengthened here. So it's not all bearish, but at the same time, we still do have all these downside targets hanging over us. Sterling jumped yesterday on the announcement of a Brexit deal, and we're sitting at that about that 141 level this morning. So quite key there that we're just holding that and looking more bullish against the dollar and looking bullish on all charts really here against the dollar. So sterling looking stronger there. Against the euro, of course, the euro benefited from the announcement as well, but the sterling jumped initially on that and then pulled all the way back. So it was unwound fairly quickly. But we're starting to look a bit more bullish here, but we're still very flat against the euro, and we see that really ever since Brexit. We had the initial fall off, and then we've just been going sideways. Can sterling recover and move through? This will be the key. But in the longer term charts, we are still bearish. Looking at against the Swiss franc, we see sterling rose here as well, and against the Australian dollar, sterling's been performing very strongly, and we're just starting to make a longer term transition here. So this is looking pretty strong indeed. Taking a look at Bitcoin, we see that Bitcoin actually was up yesterday, put us back into bullish territory on the long-term chart. We are still just holding on the lagging line, but through on the price. We do have a downside target of 8,192. That's about 2.4% downside. Upside potential, but not yet activated, of 21%. We are just turning bullish in the short term, so Bitcoin might have a better day of it. Of course, the U.S. markets was the big one. The S&P 500 index wasn't down as heavily as the Nasdaq. It was mostly in tech, but we did see the S&P deteriorating yesterday. The short-term cloud coming back under pressure. Downside target of 3% there, so that is quite key. Where the big sell-off was the Nasdaq, down almost 3% at one point, and we certainly pulled back down to 2% down. A lot of the big tech stocks, and of course Facebook is in the news, which we'll look at. But putting the Nasdaq 100 back into bearish territory on the short-term chart, another 2.5% downside potential. We still have activated this medium-term upside target, and we did make a new high on the Nasdaq, but we are just seeing a lot of volatility around that uncertainty. And if we look at the Dow Jones index, that was falling away as well yesterday. So we're back into bearish territory short term as well. So markets really do have the jitters. The Russell 2000 was down about 1%. So broadly speaking, across the whole mix of stocks, we saw quite a sell-off yesterday in the US. Looking at the S&P future this morning, this is up slightly but bearish, and the Nasdaq E-mini is still down a further 0.25%. So even though we had a little bit of recovery at the end of yesterday, it does look like we're selling off further here as well. And the FTSE 100 falling away and making new lows, which is quite significant. So we're making new multi-month, multi-year lows. If we look at the weekly chart, we're really back to levels that we saw at the start of 2017, so more than 12 months lows. So this is very bearish for the FTSE. Downside potential of 1.75% here. So we are seeing that. FTSE 250 also just pushing lower below the cloud on the short-term chart, so looking bearish there as well. The DAX fell heavily yesterday as well, just holding up now on the short-term chart, so starting to look a little bit better than the UK market, that's for sure. And the CAC also looking better there too as the UK market, although medium term still bearish. Tokyo still bearish in the short term, bearish in the medium term. Hang Seng, the Hong Kong market did actually hold up quite well yesterday, and the Shanghai market also just holding on as well. So taking the US falls in its stride. Mostly the falls we've seen are really tech related, and so not having such a massive effect on these markets. India looking less good of late. We come through the cloud on the medium term, and the short term is making new lows. So we are just seeing an effect there. And the Australian market also just struggling, short term bearish as well. Brent crude is up this morning, nearly 1% up, so we're sitting at 66.58 at the moment. So we're in bullish mode in the short term. We do have an upside target of 66.69, which we've actually nearly got to. And we do have quite a lot of medium-term upside targets now into the 70s, so it'll be interesting to see whether Brent can recover and make those levels. And WTI, we're also seeing moves higher here as well. US nat gas sitting at $2.66, just really struggling in this area, bearish in the short term. And if we take a look at gold, we see that gold is sitting bearish below the cloud still. We do have these downside targets to below 1300. Looks like we might see below 1300 before we see a move, but the longer term chart's still bullish. And taking a look at silver, we see here that silver also just turning bearish in the medium term, so looking less good than gold. US 10-year bond yields sitting at 2.86%, so we're back into bullish territory here. We've got an upside target of 2.97. That's been activated. That would be a new high, and so it will be interesting to see whether we can make that. And of course, we've got this 3.07 target on the medium term chart, not yet activated, but the 3.05 target is. So still looks likely that we might see a move to above 3% on 10-year yields in the US. Apple fell away yesterday, bearish below the cloud. It was down a couple of percent. Amazon, most tech stocks were down quite heavily. And if we look at Amazon, we did come back, still holding its bullish position on the cloud here, but not looking as bearish as some of the others. Alphabet or Google shares really were hit, and we see that sell off yesterday. We did just manage to land on cloud support, so it'd be quite interesting. We've still got a downside target of 3.5%. Of course, the big story was Facebook shares down some 7%, so down at 185. I actually sold my Facebook shares last week, and not sure why, just feeling that they weren't doing anything, and so feeling rather lucky there. But interestingly, we've taken out that low that we saw in early March, but we've been lower than this in February when we had the sell-off. So it's not a disaster yet, but bearish now, short term. If we make new lows, we've got a downside target to 144. That's 18% lower. Taking a look at Microsoft. Microsoft also sold off yesterday, as you might expect, and that's just put Microsoft shares just back below the cloud as well. Sitting on support here on the short-term chart. So it will be all eyes on Facebook. Can they recover from those levels, or will they go lower and activate that downside target? That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.